You're live.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Today's Monday, February 24th. Welcome to our work session agenda. Before we begin our meeting today, we will start with the Pledge of Allegiance. If you can please join me. As you can tell, I am not Mayor Enriquez. I am filling in, as Mayor is in Santa Fe for the next couple of days. Also, just want to remind my colleagues that because there are only 4 of us, to please remain on the dais the whole time in order to maintain quorum. And we will get started with the jobs of the week. Sarah?
Thank you. Good afternoon. Awesome. For jobs of the week for today, February 24th, we have, for the city, we have an engagement coordinator at the MVRDA starting at $21.21 an hour, and the posting ends on the 9th of March. We also have an accountant 1 for the city. That position starts at $53,000 and the posting closes on the 4th of April. We have a field service installation technician for Benco Dental. That one starts at $36,000 and the posting closes on March 17th. We have an inspector, electrical inspector 1 for community development for Doña Ana County. That one starts at $19.76 an hour and the posting closes this week, this Friday. So that one's coming to a close quickly. We have a data entry assistant at Bayjet Incorporated for $15 an hour, closing on the 20th. An assistant manager at Panda Restaurant Group, and that one closes on the 18th. And that is all that we have today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah, for coming every week.
Thank you.
Next up, we'll do Pets of the Week, and we'll have Carol Nielsen come up.
Hi, I'm Carol Nelson, Digital Content Specialist for the Animal Services Center of the Mesilla Valley. Quick reminder, Dog and Cat of the Week, when they are promoted, they are free all week, so no adoption fee. It's a great week to come meet them and adopt. If you're looking at a foster animal who is in a foster home, please contact the center beforehand to arrange a meet and greet. This week, our Cat of the Week is Tilly. 89393 if you want to look her up on our website. When I first arrived at ASCMV, I was a bit shy, but with some time and patience, I've really come out of my shell. Now I'm a total love bug. I absolutely adore gentle pets, and when I'm happy, I'll purr up a storm and even chirp for attention. I love making biscuits to show just how content I am. I thrive on affection and will soak up all the love you want to give me. I prefer to be the queen of my castle, and a single cat home would be ideal for me. And our dog of the week is Bruno, number 79072. I am full of puppy energy and excitement. I love to play, chase balls, and have a blast with friends. If you're looking for a playful pup to keep you active, go on hikes, or just run around in the backyard with, I'm your guy. I'm super friendly and looking for someone to shower with kisses. If you're looking for a fun, active puppy, I'd love for you to be my forever Valentine. And our long-term residents, as a reminder, any resident who has been with our center for 3 months or more is just $25. So Dora is still at our center. She has been here 412 days. Alice has been at our center 265 days. And unfortunately, Luna did come back to the center. Sometimes that does happen because it's not a good fit. So 256 days. But Mabel did go to a rescue, so we're happy for Mabel. That she was able to get that live outcome. And so now we have Tony, who's been with our center 248 days. And this coming weekend, we'll be at Petco. I forgot to put that down, my apologies. But Petco 3050 East Lowman from 11 to 2 will be there for our Positively Perfect Adoption event. As always, you can check out our website for more information or look at our social media. Thank you.
Thank you, Carol. Next, I will read a closed meeting statement. The City Council met in closed session at 11:06 a.m. Today, on February 24th, 2025, the following were in attendance: outside counsel Taylor Ron, Councilor McClure, Councilor Graham, Mayor Pro Tem Bencomo, Councilor Corrin, Brad Douglas, Connie Tamepao, Councilor Flores, Chief Story, and City Clerk Christine Rivera. The meeting adjourned at 11:30 a.m. Statement for the record: the closed meeting discussion was limited to the items as stated in the postponed notice. The purpose of the meeting was to discuss pending litigation regarding Estrada Francisco versus the City of Las Cruces, which is closed pursuant to NMSA 1978, Section 10-15-1. Okay, on to our agenda items. Item 4.1, the Alliance for Regional Military Support update. Elizabeth Teeters, I'll hand it over to you.
Good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. As you know, we periodically like to give our partners an opportunity to present in front of all of you and update you on what they've been working on. So today we have the Alliance for Regional Military Support, or ARMS. So with that, I will turn it over to Gus and Richard.
Good afternoon. For the record, Richard Dayub with the Alliance and Gus Rodriguez.
Gus Rodriguez for the Alliance for Regional Military Support. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, City Manager, members of council. It's been a while since we've presented in person. We usually do this, in written format, which we've already done, but we wanted to come before you today because we've been doing so many things with Elizabeth of recent. We thought it'd be a good idea to update you. So without further ado, Gus, I'll hand it off to you.
Okay. Next slide, please.
I think we do it here.
Okay. We are the next slide. I'm sorry.
Here we go.
Okay. So just for everyone's understanding, the Alliance for Regional Military
Sir,
Support.
I'll just need you
Yes.
close and then state your name for the record.
Yes, Gus Rodriguez, Alliance for Regional Military Support. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The Alliance for Regional Military Support, its mission is to ensure that Fort Bliss, White Sands, and Holloman Air Force Base, the triad, remain an integral part of the nation's national defense strategy. And our goal is to solidify and enhance the capabilities of our regional military installations, missions, and the importance to the Department of Defense. And our strategy is to develop actionable items to enhance the military value of the region to the Department of Defense. Okay, Richard?
Oh, okay. We don't have to switch. I'll just cut to the chase with some of these key things. Of course, White Sands means an enormous economic impact value to the city of Las Cruces and the surrounding area. So the work that we do, and we have two other gentlemen who couldn't make it up today, Lance Lear, who's a former Command Sergeant Major, retired from Fort Bliss, actually, the 1st Armored Division, and a gentleman named John Bailey, and the four of us work very closely with Elizabeth. And our focus primarily, as you scan through that third bullet to me is the most important one of all, and that is economic development. And that's what we've been sounding our horn to all of our neighboring communities regarding their military installations, because that's exactly what they are. Of course, they have a mission to perform, and that's to defend our nation. When we first began doing this a number of years ago, long before we got involved with each of the city's economic development departments in the various communities, our focus initially was in trying to recruit more units, therefore more soldiers and their families to our communities. And we've been successful with that for the most part. But as the military is transitioning, and Gus won't spend a lot of time bragging on himself, so I'll brag on him for you. His title, separate from the arms group, is a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army. He represents West Texas, so he doesn't really represent Las Cruces. But because of that title, he works very closely with the commanding general out at White Sands Missile Range and their team. And also because of that, and we'll get through that as he touches on some of these slides, speaking about what he and Elizabeth have been working on together, have been really essentially helpful in our understanding of what the military, and particularly the Army's mission is today, how it's modified, and then how we as communities need to sort of shift our efforts to ensure that we're meeting those needs. So with that in mind, we'll go on to the next effort right there.
If I could just backtrack, and again, here, not in my capacity as representing the Army, but in my own civilian capacity, so I just want to state that for the record. So as Richard mentioned, one of the things that we've been working very closely with Elizabeth is making sure that we make that connection in a much stronger way between White Sands Missile Range and the city of Las Cruces. So had various opportunities to have discussions with the installation commander and some of his deputies to understand what the needs are of the installation and how the city of Las Cruces can respond to those needs. One of those needs was one of the big discussions that we had regarded workforce. Many individuals don't realize that 50% of the workforce at White Sands is at retirement age, so at any time they can go ahead and retire. So that was a conversation that we were having with Elizabeth regarding the possibility of how do we engage more citizens from the city to be able to take a look at those job opportunities at White Sands Missile Range. And as Richard mentioned, we work very closely with her in regards to understanding the mission and activity of White Sands Missile Range. Some of the other things that we're taking a look at is how do we connect the city of Las Cruces to those entities, those defense industry partners that White Sands has. In many cases, they have a presence at White Sands, but in some cases they live in the city. They, their kids go to school here, but they have not made that. There's not that visibility and understanding of how we can better connect those entities with the city of Las Cruces and take a look at the possibility of expanding that presence, or as a city responding to the various needs that they have in terms of workforce, in terms of defense industry possibilities, and how do we work with the city to get them connected. And one of those, as I mentioned, is taking a look at the workforce needs. We had various conversations with defense industry partners on what are some of their needs and how can the city connect all of those opportunities, for example, with New Mexico State or Doña Ana Community College, to be able to find work for individuals that are graduating from those respective educational institutions. And also taking a look at how we can connect some of the defense industry partners to the Las Cruces Airport as an alternative site for defense contractors, in this case a counter unmanned aerial system testing and development. And then there's also the possibility of maybe some refueling opportunities that we've been taking a look at in terms of that relationship building. From the perspective of a research and development center, we encouraged Elizabeth and representatives of the Economic Development Department to attend the Counter UAS conference in Fort Sill, Oklahoma, mainly because that testing is being done at White Sands. So again, a great opportunity to be able to understand what that mission set is and how the city can connect to what's going on. So various meetings with folks in Lawton as to what they are doing. Their aspect of it is not the actual testing component of it, but they're the development side, and then they send the equipment to White Sands to be tested and for them to do research and development on those here locally. And we also had an opportunity to connect folks from the Economic Development Department to their counterparts and to key stakeholders in Lawton as to how they went about, connecting those dots between the city of Lawton and Fort Sill, Oklahoma. Yes. Again, we mentioned that we had a question and answer meeting opportunity with members of their board to be able to talk about how they went about this effort. And then we scheduled a meeting with key leaders from White Sands to discuss the possibility of maybe developing a center in Las Cruces that could mirror the work that's being done in Lawton and find a niche for that center here in Las Cruces to be able to work with the Department of Defense. And again, provided leads to the City Economic Development Department, connecting with Lockheed, Raytheon, and a company by the name of Ignite. So, yes, go ahead, Richard. So in terms of our next steps is we want to continue those discussions between the city of Las Cruces and White Sands Missile Range about the possibility of developing an innovation center that we can use the many existing components that the city already has, that we can go ahead and connect them together and become a response to address the various needs that White Sands and defense industry partners have. And when I talk about White Sands, I'm talking a little bit more broadly, not just Department of the Army, because White Sands also has Navy, Air Force, Space Force is coming into play, and then there's also a large NASA presence that obviously can respond through the use of this potential innovation center. And we've had some discussions with those defense industry partners about an interest on their part, and as to would they be able to utilize, a center of this type. And obviously the response has been very, very positive. And we're also, and then also including addressing some of the workforce needs of White Sands, in this innovation center. So, any questions?
Thank you both. Any questions from the council? Seeing none, any from the public? Looks like that's it.
Thank you.
In closing, just first of all, on behalf of ARMS, we want to thank you all for taking the time to listen to us today. And she did not pay us any money, but I want to tell you that working with Elizabeth and moving this forward in terms of an economic development-centric effort has really been good for all of us. We really enjoy working with her. And I will offer this. We had a meeting last Friday with a member of Congresswoman Escobar's team who deals with military out of D.C. She was in town. And one of the things she said to us, unsolicited, was that when Las Cruces comes to D.C., in addition, obviously, to meeting with their own delegation, that when they come to meet with Escobar's office, that you're extremely well prepared and you know exactly what you want to do, and that you're then asking for their assistance in order for you to accomplish your goals. And that's a compliment you don't hear about many communities. So just to pass that on, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Appreciate that. I know. Thank you. Okay, on to our next item, 4.2, the 7th Semi-Annual Police Audit Report presented by the OIR Group. Viola, pass it over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, Mayor Pro Tem, councilors. My name is Viola Perea, and today we have the OIR group here with us to present their 7th semi-annual police audit report to council. So with that, I'd like to introduce our presenters, Teresa Magula and Stephen Connolly.
Hello, Mayor Pro Tem and City Council. We are so excited to be here again today. This is the 7th time that we are presenting to your council on our semi-annual reports related to the evaluation of the Las Cruces Police Department. I am Teresa Magula, and this is my colleague Steve Conley. We have our findings to present to you as we traditionally do. So we'll do our PowerPoint, and then we will welcome any questions that you all may have.
So, good afternoon. Steve Conley here, and happy to be back in your city. I think at this point, the council members and the city government is pretty familiar with us and our background, but just to briefly provide some context, OIR Group is a team of police practices experts. We operate out of Southern California. We have been doing this kind of work in a number of jurisdictions for more than 20 years now. And we have a number of ongoing relationships with jurisdictions throughout California and in several other states as well, including New Mexico, obviously. And one of I think the advantages of the wide range of places where we have had the opportunity to work and to collaborate with law enforcement and provide oversight and auditing services is that we really get to have a bigger picture of law enforcement issues and best practices and some of the challenges that have come in different places, and try to bring that, especially the good ideas and the positive developments, we try to bring that to the jurisdictions that we're working with and hopefully make a positive contribution to these processes. So we have, our time in Las Cruces dates back to 2021. And as Teresa said, this is our 7th time reporting to council on an individual audit report. So our case, the scope, I want to talk a little bit about the scope of work, what exactly the city has requested of us, what is our contract, what is the nature of the work that we do here in Las Cruces. And what we do is basically an audit, a review of cases that were investigated and closed by the department within particular periods of time. And we work in 6-month increments and report to the city twice a year and issue a public report twice a year that provides detailed information about every single one of the cases that we have the opportunity to review. So our primary focus is on internal affairs investigations and the way the department responds to public complaints about officer behavior, officer performance, and then internally generated investigations that the department opens when it becomes aware of potential concerns about officer behavior, officer misconduct. Our job, as the slide says, is to make sure that the cases were complete, objective, and thorough in terms of the investigation process. The legitimacy of the investigation process is a very important part of our mandate here, because obviously when the police are in control of these investigations, they're investigating themselves. There's kind of some natural skepticism about how seriously that gets taken and whether the department or any department is really legitimately interested or even legitimately able, because of maybe unintentional biases or favoritism towards colleagues. Our job is to make sure that the department looks at everything, does an investigation that is thorough and complete, and that the outcomes of each case are legitimate and supported by the evidence. And then at the request of the council, and as part of our contract, we also provide updates on demographics as far as officer involvement and the profiles of complainants. So in this particular 6-month window, which ran from July 1st of 2024 to December 31st of 2024, we looked at a total of 20 cases. The last time we were here, we only had 8 cases that were in our pipeline from the previous 6 months, and so this is obviously a significantly longer report, a number of additional issues that we've been looking at. And the spike in cases from this year, or from this audit report compared to the last one, really is more procedural than a indication of changes within the department as far as the volume of activity, the volume of public concerns, the number of misconduct allegations that they're dealing with. We had a backlog just in terms of a contractual little break that we experienced as we were kind of updating our terms and navigating through that with the city. And so there were several cases that had been completed in an earlier period that we kind of just got in this marking period and were able to catch up with. And at the same time, the department has also made a concerted effort to complete cases in a more timely manner, and a number of cases made it through the pipeline during this particular window that we've been talking about. So of the 20 cases that we looked at, significantly 20 of them were generated from within the department itself. There were only 3 external complaints from members of the public that were part of our scope of work, and we met with the chief this morning. There are other issues and concerns. There's a higher volume of stuff that the public brings to the department's attention and that is technically classified as a type of complaint, but the department processes those at a different level, and only ones of a certain level of seriousness or when there's a level of supporting evidence are going to make it to our scope of work. So again, we looked at 17 cases out of the 20 that were generated by the department, And just in terms of some of the themes that ran through them, several of them related to uses of the taser. Teresa will talk a little bit more about the taser later in our presentation, but there were several uses of force involving the taser that the department took a closer look at and found that there were some concerns about whether officer deployment of that tool was consistent with policy and justification under the circumstances. So we'll talk about that a little bit more. A case involving a response to a mental health crisis call, which is certainly a common theme throughout law enforcement, navigating that particular challenge of dealing with mental health people who are experiencing a crisis of some kind and figuring out the best ways to handle that situation, because there's a lot of overlap between, obviously, law enforcement concerns, potential for violence, safety, public safety, but also a behavioral health component as well. And then a number of cases involving issues of integrity and officer misconduct. One of the cases that we looked at involved a cheating issue at the academy with some officers, recruit officers who were in the department's academy. And the department found out about concerns about recruits cheating on some of the academic work that the officers or that the recruits are responsible for as part of that program. The department initiated a very thorough and rigorous investigation right away and separated several of those folks from the agency as a result of that. As far as the external cases were concerned, oftentimes it relates to some dissatisfaction with some aspect of a call for service, and these can obviously vary. There are a lot of different ways that a member of the public can become frustrated or discontented with the effectiveness of the department's approach. Interestingly enough, in several of the cases that we have looked at, including some of the internally generated ones, the department starts with one concern, and then in the course of the investigation, they'll identify what they call ancillary issues, things that weren't part of the original complaint, but that have come to the department's attention, whether it's a report writing problem or a body-worn camera activation problem that the complainant might not even be aware of. But the department is going to go ahead and add that onto its investigation and make sure that all of the issues are identified. And that's something we very much pushed for from the beginning, and I think it's a sign of a good process, because a lot of times, particularly with public complaints, the inclination is just to zero in on the very specific things a complainant raised concerns about. And even though other aspects of the officer performance may be relevant or may be worthy of intervention or remediation in some form or other, a lot of times police agencies will just kind of skim right past that and cut to the chase of the specific thing that the complainant was asking about. And we think it's a positive sign of the department's process that it's willing to expand the scope of its investigations and hold its people accountable when it has the opportunity to review performance. I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa to talk about some of the cumulative statistical outcomes from this year's group or this half year's group of cases.
And so as part of our scope of work, we report several different batches of numbers to you so that you can kind of get a context of the total universe of what we are looking at. In the 20 cases that Steve was talking about, both internal and externally generated, the department framed 88 total allegations. So what does that mean? In the course of looking at the nature of the complaint, the department's internal affairs unit is finding specific policies or procedures that are potentially being violated. Doesn't mean that they are, but it's something that they're framing so that they can understand if that officer or officers engaged in misconduct. So when we say allegations, we're saying specific policy sections or subsections where the misconduct may have occurred. That might be something as broad as the code of conduct generally for a complaint where a member of the public says, I was dissatisfied with how that officer spoke to me. That wasn't professional. So those would be the nature of those total allegations. Once the allegation is framed and Internal Affairs does an investigation into it, they have findings. And so the findings come into one of 4 different categories. The notable thing here is that 63 of the 88 were sustained. That means that the department's investigation found that misconduct did occur and was a violation of policy or procedure. This number to us is telling in part because one of the things we want to see is a system of accountability that is effective. And what we're seeing with this is that the investigations that are being opened, in particular internally generated, are where supervisors within the chain of command are seeing that officers' performance is lacking in some way. They are raising that to internal affairs, and internal affairs is appropriately finding those to be sustained. From that point forward, that corrective action can take place. And so that's really the space where the department has room to be able to do remediation, training. Sometimes it's more higher level of discipline, so days off or suspension, and in some cases it goes all the way to determining that the officer should no longer be part of the department, results in some sort of separation or termination. In the cases that we reviewed, we saw 33 named LCPD employees. 20 of those were officers, and you see that asterisk is noted that 2 of the cases involved the same officer. That officer is no longer with the Las Cruces Police Department. We saw 1 lieutenant who has since retired, 4 detectives, 4 sergeants, those 3 cadets that Steve mentioned, and 1 officer trainee. And again, as I said, where we have those sustained allegations, you can have a whole range of actions that come out of those. The lower level of discipline might include something like a verbal reprimand. That's where the officers essentially get a counseling session and it's noted in their file. And it can go all the way to suspension days, so days off. And those range in the length of time that the chief of police believes is appropriate, and in some cases, all the way to termination. In the cases where it was anything below termination, so where the officer remains within the agency, we found that the department is doing a progressively better job of including some form of training, counseling, debrief of some form to ensure that that officer or supervisor is receiving the right kind of course correction. It's not just a hammer down. It's really an intent to build that member of the department up to be able to serve to the level that the community expects them to serve. And so I think that's a really important component. And what we've seen that is sometimes missing in other agencies that we review is that the department does an excellent job of closing the feedback loop. So if the chief and internal affairs determine that there is the need for some kind of training or debrief, there is an email track that says, Supervisor X, you're responsible for completing this. When the supervisor completes it, closes the feedback loop, goes into the internal affairs file, we see that that was completed. That's not always the case. Sometimes these recommendations in other agencies that we review go out, and then we don't know if it actually happened. Here, LCPD is doing a very concerted job of documenting that it is completed in the way that the chief intended it to be. One of the aspects that we looked at, and this is from our very initial scope of work, was, is there any suggestion that there is a disproportionate impact within the communities that the Las Cruces Police Department serves? One of the ways that we might see that is if a higher number of complaints are coming from a certain type, subsection, whether that be their ethnicity or race, or a particular zip code. Are there places where there is more behavior that is being complained about than others? We've had the benefit now of being able to do a much larger sample size. So when we first started, we were looking at 10, 20, 30 cases that wouldn't give us anything that was remotely significant from a statistical standpoint. We've gotten to 60. That's a large enough sample that we could potentially draw some conclusions. And we did a really basic statistical analysis called a relative risk ratio. Essentially, what I was looking for was, compared to the population of Las Cruces, the demographic population, from census numbers. Is there a disproportionate number of complaints coming from certain members, certain types of individuals? We found that that was not proven in our statistical model. Now, I want to caution that, of course, this is not something to prove that this is not occurring. It's simply a statistical analysis, a way that we could measure. But certainly one thing that we continue to encourage is that individuals who feel that they have been wronged or that have not been satisfied with the outcome of police contact reach out and file those complaints. It's really the only way that we can remediate in a formal way and track those numbers. And so the fact that we're not seeing disproportionality may not indicate that it's not actually happening. It might mean that there are members of community who are not feeling sufficiently safe to voice their concerns and complaints. So it could be either side of that equation, and we just don't have any evidence at this point to suggest that there's any kind of disproportionate treatment occurring from the law enforcement to its community. Back to you. Oh, no, me. Sorry, I had to see who was doing this slide. We also take a look at litigation that was closed. In this particular period, we saw 2 cases of closed litigation. One of the things that we encouraged, and you might recall from several cycles ago, is that the civil claims that were being closed were not always tied to an internal affairs investigation. And it is, in our view, important that those 2 things go hand in hand. So if someone has a civil claim that they filed, that should trigger an internal investigation that the department looks at, because something has gone sideways, right, for someone to file a claim. And that should be reviewed from the administrative side, not simply the civil litigation side. So the thing that we were pleased to see in this cycle, and that we've been seeing for the past year or so, is that each of these cases is triggering an internal affairs investigation, or in the cases here, the internal affairs investigation was already going at the same time as the claim. So LCPD acknowledged that this may be a problem and launched an internal investigation into each of these. One is the response to the mental health crisis call that Steve spoke about earlier that involved the excessive use of force, and the other involved allegations of workplace harassment. Both of those cases have since been settled by the city. Back to Steve.
So, in terms of our function here, obviously the auditing, the close review of each individual case is hopefully useful and provides additional transparency, additional insight into the kinds of things that have emerged as concerns and the ways that the department is responding. Another part of our role is to make recommendations to the department and/or the city based on the individual cases that we look at. So one of the things, again, to go back to that idea of best practices in terms of how to conduct an investigation or just different approaches to some of the things that we end up seeing because of the individual cases that get onto our assembly line. We have made a number of recommendations over the years to the department, and we are pleased to say that the department has been very, very responsive in terms of considering them, talking to us about and making sure that we all understand what we mean, and I would say in the vast majority of cases, making a commitment to implement the recommendations in whole or part. And we feel like that is leading to some systemic improvements. And I think in an encouraging way, and in a way that just sort of makes sense, the lower hanging fruit is gone. The stuff that we were identifying when we first got here is like, wow, we're not used to seeing it this way, and have you considered other approaches? The department has made a number of adjustments since we first got here in 2021, and now, as the slide says, it's really more in the area of refinements as opposed to major attempts to address what we consider as perhaps deficiencies in the process or real weak parts in the process. So We are continuing to make recommendations. We're still having that dialogue with the department, and but hopefully, again, the relationship over time has led to a better product within internal affairs and strengthened the quality of the cases before they even get to us. As we're also pleased to say that internal affairs, which had a major backlog a year and a half or so ago, there was a real commitment under Chief Story to addressing that backlog, addressing those cases, cleaning up the things that were outstanding. And from a timing perspective, I would say the department is very much caught up. Since January 1st of this year, we've had very few. We talked to Lieutenant Alva this morning, and there are a few cases that are about to come our way, but the department has basically caught up and is now, we're probably going to be on a much more level, kind of predictable pattern in terms of the volume of cases in each term. And that whole idea of timeliness is important for a number of reasons. One, because they're just in terms of the potential need to remediate conduct, but just from an efficiency perspective and the effectiveness of the investigation, if you're talking to people, witnesses, 3 weeks after the event instead of 9 months after the event, you're going to probably get better information and more reliable evidence that you can use to draw your conclusions. And I would say, I hope that the overall impression that we're giving is that our sense is that these investigations are thorough and fair and that the department is taking this process seriously and doing a good job. So from our perspective, obviously, the fact that there were 17 or 20, a total of 20 cases and so many sustained allegations of misconduct, you'd like to say, boy, wouldn't it be great if the department were perfect and nobody was violating policy? I think that in any agency, that's kind of an unrealistic expectation. And our experience has been the public doesn't necessarily expect police officers to all be perfect and to get it right. And sometimes they're going to make mistakes, not necessarily out of malice, but because of a lack of training or what have you. I think the important thing is when something does go wrong or when an allegation is brought to the department's attention, what is the quality and commitment that the department has to accountability and fixing things that need to be fixed. And I think we can say with some confidence that the department has shown us certainly an inclination to do that. And we're always going to offer a different perspective and kind of chime in, and we don't always 100% agree with every nuance of the things that we're looking at, but we very much appreciate the responsiveness of the department. Every time we have a question or concern, we want more information. They're great about getting us the access that is a key part of our process. And we have a very positive relationship with the chief where we can talk candidly about different things that are on our mind and just kind of stay apprised of what's going on with the department and what some of his concerns are. And again, in terms of our recommendations, a lot of them are pretty much inside baseball refinements of things that are not necessarily, wouldn't necessarily be significantly noticeable to the public, but I think would operationally contribute to efficiency and investigative effectiveness. We talked about the importance of framing allegations the right way, making sure that everything that a complainant raises is appropriately addressed and specifically responded to in the investigation. And ironically, we kind of get the department coming and going because one of our recommendations had to do with overly complex framing, too many policy sections that were really talking about the same allegation, same issue of conduct. And so we just encourage them to kind of streamline things and take a more common sense approach to make sure everything is covered, but not necessarily in an overly complicated or duplicative way. And again, we mentioned the importance of timeliness and with regard to the interviews of witnesses or involved officers, we felt like there was a little bit of room for improvement there. I'm going to turn it back over to Teresa to bring it across the finish line. We're almost done, I promise. Hang in there.
To me, the procedural function is very important, that the department get it right and is committed to that accountability. And I think to piggyback on what Steve was saying, we are seeing a system that the public and that your council can have confidence in, right? So the other component that we take a look at is beyond just these allegations, beyond the specific nature of potential misconduct, what are some more holistic types of functions, changes, and policy recommendations that are being raised as a function of these kind of one-off incidents where misconduct may be occurring? And so we always try to highlight those as well as the nuances, the inside baseball, as Steve said, of the procedure itself. In this period, we saw that, again, supervisors, especially line supervisors, your sergeants in patrol functions mainly, are a critical component of an organization. And we saw that in 2 cases, and it went in 2 different directions. In one, we saw a supervisor take very proactive intervention in the investigation of a domestic violence case. That supervisor continued to kick back a case to an officer with explicit instructions on how to do the investigation properly. And when that officer was not responding in the way that the supervisor felt was appropriate, escalated that up the chain of command to internal affairs. That's the type of supervisor intervention that the department is committed to. Unfortunately, sometimes the supervisors might not get it right. And so we saw a particular case in which a supervisor came onto the scene with what appeared to be some intention to manage and direct, and then supervisor himself became involved in the nature of the incident, rather than taking that step back and supervising and directing officers, became involved. In that particular case, we noted in our memo that the department missed an opportunity to evaluate that supervisor's performance. So really, the framing of the allegations that we were talking about focused on the officer conduct, and missed that opportunity to hold a supervisor accountable. What we've discussed frequently with the department, and we actually had a conversation just this morning with Chief Story and his command, is the idea that there's a lot of training at the front end for officers who are new. There's the academy, there's the FTO program, there's a lot of hand-holding and helping out and mentorship. That is not always true when someone promotes to become a sergeant. And so the department is looking to develop that supervisor position with more training and more mentorship. And that's a trend that we're seeing across departments that we work in, is that it's sort of a missed promotion space where you're just expected to go in and transition from how you have been performing as an officer for years sometimes. And suddenly, now you're in charge of people who maybe just yesterday were your peers. And it's a tricky space for supervisors to navigate. And so we're looking at the department, I think, is looking at the opportunity to have a FTO, field training officer type program for their supervisors, to have that one-on-one training and mentorship with a supervisor that's going to help you raise your skill level and the way that you're responding to scenes. And that's something that, again, we're seeing across law enforcement, a missed window of promotion where the expectation is not quite meeting the resources available to those supervisors. The other area that we've been harping on since the start of our engagement is domestic disturbance and civil standby calls. Really were concerned at the start of our work that we were seeing officers who were not quite clear on how to respond to this category of cases. It's a high volume of calls for service within the city of Las Cruces. And we wanted to make sure that officers had the tools and the resources that they needed to respond appropriately to these calls. We have seen the department develop officers by providing a lot of training and resources and guidance, including directed training and department-wide annual training, training bulletins and reminders, and so on. As tends to happen, we're a little bit behind the curve, so some of the cases that we saw in this period did not reflect that new way of responding to these types of calls for service. One of them dates back to 2022, before the department took any kind of market intervention. And so what we're hopeful is that the trend towards better responses will continue, and that this was just a factor of the cases being behind the curve, rather than of officers not getting it. Finally, and the one that's really interesting to me, are updates to the TASER policy. As Steve mentioned, we saw 4 cases in this particular period where the department found some challenge with the use of that TASER device. Essentially, it was understanding if the subject was meeting the level of resistance, the threshold for use of that device. So in order to use certain tools, the subject with which you're having that encounter needs to meet certain thresholds and certain levels to make that force reasonable and justified. And there was some concern in these 4 TASER deployments that the individual was not quite meeting that threshold. To its credit, the department found those at the supervisor level. So the moment the supervisor reviewed those cases, as they do as part of a regular use of force review practice, they said, maybe not quite right. Let's escalate this. We've talked to you all before about their use of force review cadre. It's a team of special experts that take a really deep dive into incidents to understand if the use of force was reasonable and necessary. And in 3 of the 4 cases, in all 4 cases, the cadre found that the use of the TASER device was not reasonable given the level of threat presented to them. In seeing that, the department decided we need to do something about this, yeah? And so they had a very concerted effort to revamp the TASER policy, both to make it more clear for officers what those threat levels were, define them very explicitly within policy, which then translates to training. And also an important component was to provide some steps as to how TASER deployment should occur. And most important, in our view, was providing a warning, a verbal warning, that the TASER device may be used in specific incidents. A warning of force is already in the department's use of force policy. So it's not that they didn't do that, but there is case law that specifically requires that the TASER device be verbally warned. And the department updated its TASER policy to reflect that. A sign of its interest in collaboration is that we were given the opportunity to work with the department to review their draft policy. We provided some thoughts, recommendations, language modifications, and for the most part, the department was very welcoming of those and incorporated them. It's a space that I have great pride in working with departments in, because when you're in-house, you might not see all of the different components, and having that third-party outside perspective can be helpful. And so I'm very grateful that we had the opportunity to collaborate on the TASER policy. And finally, we had our first community outreach session after our last council meeting. That was back in August of '24. It was, in our view, very well attended. Steve and I often hold these community listening sessions or town hall type sessions, and we get, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 interested people trickle in. But this had, here in council chambers, almost all of the seats filled, and we were very gratified by your community's willingness to engage with us. I see some familiar faces here that attended the session. There was, both sides articulated, some folks who were very pleased with department performance, others who were concerned about certain incidents that had occurred, others who were concerned about our scope of work. Are we really seeing all the investigations that we should? Why can't we give you more information about specifics and disciplinary consequences and so on? Others who wanted to voice concern over the way that certain incidents were outwardly publicized. So, for example, was the body-worn camera footage appropriately released? Was there a press conference about it? Were you hiding information? And I think the overall message is that has improved since time has gone by, and certainly under Chief Story's tenure. a willingness to engage, to present information as far as the department is able to, and to really collaborate with community on sharing as much as they're able to. We look very forward to tonight, and so I'll request that members of the community who would want to engage with us, who have more to share, who have questions about our work, join us this evening. We are hosting our second session at the Munson Senior Center. It is from 6 to 8 p.m., so that is today. It's Monday, 6 to 8 p.m. at the Munson Senior Center. Steve and I will be there. It's really an open forum. There's no need to hold back or to be concerned, and we're there to listen and hopefully have some collaborative engagement that will inform our work going forward. And as always, if there is anyone who has questions, comments, concerns, needs to reach us, wants to file a complaint but doesn't know how, is concerned about filing a complaint with the department and needs a third party to take that, please reach out to us. We are info@oirgroup.com. And if anyone wants to see our past work or work in other jurisdictions, all our reports are available on our website. And with that, we'll take questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you both for joining us once more. Is there any questions from the council? Oh no, well, they're going to leave them all to me because I do have some questions. Again, thank you, and thank you for ending on the note about the community meeting and how that went. I think there's members of our community who care very deeply about the question of police oversight and accountability, so I'm glad that you were able to see that and that they showed up for these opportunities. I just have honestly, some big overarching questions. I'm curious about, I always do appreciate when you write in your memos when there's been disagreements with your findings and the findings of AI or the police department in general. But I'm wondering what happens after that. You disagree and then what?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you, Mayor Pro Tem, for that question. So essentially, the process of discipline lives in the hands of the chief of police, right? Mm-hmm. And so when we have a disagreement as to a finding on a case that's closed, more often than not, and that is not just here in Las Cruces, it's across all of our work, there is no going back to change that finding, right? However, what we're looking for is to raise the concern as a possibility for future action. Sometimes our disagreement might result in a holistic measure. So it can't influence the individual case and the individual officer's outcome, but it may result in a holistic change, policy change, training bulletin, some other remedial action on the larger scope. And that's really the intention. Other times, it's simply to raise to both you and to members of the public that maybe it didn't quite go the way that we thought it should go, and we want to make folks aware that there is space for that disagreement if the evidence did not support the findings in the way that we saw it.
I think Teresa answered that question very well. The only thing I would add is that it's oftentimes it ends up being in the agree to disagree category. It's not, hey, we think this is a fundamental breach of ethics or integrity or anything else. It's oftentimes a more nuanced insight that we might have or an approach. And as Teresa said, it's not our role to substitute our judgment for that of the department, but just to flag the issues, hopefully in a constructive way on a going forward basis. And the dialogue with the department is always constructive.
Thank you. I appreciate that very much. And Chief, this question's for you. I'm curious about the note they made about officer to supervisor, the potential for training. If you could speak more to that opportunity and how you're thinking about it.
Mayor Pro Tem, Jeremy Story, Police Chief. That program has existed since I've been here for our first line supervisors, our sergeants. However, it's definitely improved and will continue to improve, and there's room for that improvement. Just to give some context, when I promoted to sergeant in January of 2014, I started my first day on patrol as a sergeant by myself as a sergeant. And so there was already a field training program for supervisors at that time, but obviously I hadn't received any of it, and I was already by myself as a sergeant making decisions. Not optimal. That's changed a lot over time. That doesn't happen anymore. And so the training program started, the formal training program started probably 2 years ago or so. So we make sure that our sergeants have all the kind of different pieces or blocks that they should have: internal affairs training, critical incident management training, leadership training. And they have that hopefully before they ever become a sergeant or shortly after, because it comes in different blocks. They also go to a first line supervision class. That's been a 40-hour class that people go to forever, but that's certainly not sufficient. And then the field training program, we just tweaked that and modified it to make it better. And I'm very happy with the work that went into it and what it looks like now. And so that it hopefully is the next level of what we've been doing. And that actually started, we had 2 sergeants promote on Sunday, and they just started that new program. So we'll have a good kind of measure or review of how it went soon.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that, and of course, appreciate you raising that. And actually, my last question really is around the civil disturbance. I think that has been an issue for a while, including myself. And actually, there was a few months ago at this point, a local doctor, psychiatrist met with myself, both our chief of police and fire, to discuss this matter further. And their sort of question was, why can't our team light out of the fire department be used in those instances? And of course, I learned a lot from that conversation in terms of these calls actually being some of the most dangerous calls, and why the fire department didn't believe that that was necessarily a space for light. But I am wondering if you have sort of, you said that this is happening across the country, like what are the best practices that you have? Can you just give us a summary of the best practices that you've provided the department on how to better address this specific issue?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. The first answer that I'll give is that there's not an easy answer to this one. We have reviewed programs nationwide, and there are just an endless number of models. The one, it really is city dependent, right? And so some models that work very effectively are to pair officers and clinicians, and sometimes the resources just aren't there to have that happen. Others that we have found that might be effective are similar to what's happening in the city, to have a non-sworn response of clinicians that can respond to some of these calls. Now, we run into the issue of potentially those calls having some public safety or danger components, making it not quite safe for those teams to respond. We found that the hybrid model is effective, and many cities are implementing that effectively, where there is an initial law enforcement response, and once that scene is secured, then there's the component that can come in from the social service or clinical side. But certainly there is not an easy one-size-fits-all for this type of crisis response. When we reviewed a case, I want to say it was maybe 2 cycles ago, and I can come back with more information on that for you. We found that the department was really doing its due diligence in terms of using its own internal resources to the best capacity, so like a crisis negotiator type role, really focusing on their de-escalation training and how they're going to interact with individuals from that standpoint, rather than coming in hard-hitting with force or escalating an incident that is already fairly heated most of the time. And so we did review a case where we had some suggestions using the city's resources to come into those calls, in addition to the law enforcement response.
Thank you for that. Chief, is there anything you want to add on this?
Mayor Pro Tem, I would make the distinction between a crisis response, so somebody in a mental health crisis, and then domestic violence. Obviously, there's overlap at times. The mental health crisis might spur the domestic disturbance or domestic violence issue, but there is a separation. So, and again, just to give the opportunity to give kudos to fire, Project Light has been a massive success. I thought it was going to work. I think it's worked even better than I thought. Our officers trust it. And I don't know how much room really there is for expansion, just logistically. But that's worked very well for the crisis response side of things. For domestic violence, I think it's a little bit trickier. And we'll look for ways. I'm open to ideas, but that is harder.
Thanks, Chief. And if there are internal conversations, I think I would just like to encourage that the department continue to work with the LIGHT team and the licensed clinical social workers we have there. I think they're tremendously knowledgeable. Thank you. Those are all my questions. Any? Okay, I'll go to the public and we'll do, thank you, 3 minutes. And just remember that this is a work session, so the comments must pertain to the things on the agenda, and we cannot discuss pending litigation. Coming up.
Mayor Pro Tem, City Councilors, my name is Liz Rodriguez Johnson. Based on my own personal experience, I believe the Las Cruces Police Department is doing a good job, for the most part. And most of what is written in the OIR report indicates the LCPD is doing a very good job. It is a good thing to have LCPD internal processes examined, and it's even better when the examination reveals that LCPD is doing a very good job. The report indicates that the LCPD is receptive to constructive criticism and making changes based on recommendations from the OIR experts, police experts. And from looking at their website, the OIR experts seem to have impeccable credentials. My main concern is the scope of the contract that OIR was awarded. Last year and the year before, I believe, several of us were very specific in our request that the OIR contract include examinations of excessive use of force, especially when it led to the loss of life. There needs to be much, much more transparency when it comes to investigating cases where excessive use of force is executed, because that's what the public is most concerned about. If I remember correctly, last year or the year before, we were told that 2 committees within the city structure examines excessive use of force, but we were not briefed on what they learned or what was done to make sure it didn't happen. And looking at the issue historically, I am not convinced that enough is being done. In 2020, there was the Valenzuela case. I assume these committees did their thing to ensure it wouldn't happen again. Unfortunately, in 23, there was the Presley East case, so I assume the committees did their thing again to ensure that it wouldn't happen again. Unfortunately, again, in 23, we had the Teresa Gomez case. I'm really, really worried because people are dying and no one is telling us what is being done to prevent it. As a very, very concerned citizen, I'm asking again, what are elected officials doing to prevent this? I do have a bone to pick with the OIR report. On page 2, it says that the town hall was well attended. In my opinion, it was not. I believe I'm being generous when I say there was maybe 15 people here, and there was more than sufficient number of city staff, but none that could answer the question why the OIR contract did not include cases that dealt with excessive use of force that led to the loss of life. For that reason, I found the town hall to be inadequate. My conclusion from the characterization that was just made was if the town hall was sugar-coated, then what else was sugar-coated? But to reiterate, my main concern is if you don't address the issue of excessive use of force that leads to the loss of life, you are not addressing the issue of the biggest concern to your community. Thank you.
Thank you. And other folks? Come on up. And you're a pro, but just a reminder, state your name, please.
I'm Dr. Earl Nissen, and I live in Las Cruces. I have some questions I'd like to direct to Teresa, since we've gotten to know each other over the past few years. During the 7 audits, you never dealt with a police shooting incident, have you?
Dr. Neeson, just ask all your questions and then we'll have her come up.
What?
No, because there's only one microphone. Dr. Neeson, can you just make your comments, ask your questions, and then we'll have her come up.
Because I would think that as the recent trial we had of an officer, there was very specific things about the policing that took place by the paid people who came for each side during the trial. And I was thinking that much of what was said at the trial should be of interest to Chief Story, because those extensive analyses were just the thing we would need possibly from OIR. OIR does these types of analyses, and I have read many of them when we were doing research on doing a police review board last year. And I would not want to impede anything that Chief Story is doing, because I agree that what a change in the police department. But when we come to the serious police shooting cases, I would think that any analysis that he could get from someone like OIR would help tremendously in making any changes in procedures or hiring practices or whatever. So I was wondering if the City Council would be interested in extending our contract with OIR, and that would have to be done to put in the contract clause about doing analyses of police shootings. And it would cost a little bit more for that service.
Thank you, Dr. Neeson. Did you want to restate your question?
Yeah, yes, my question to Teresa would be that we have never had, first of all, I want to know if we've ever had an OIR analysis of any of the police shootings.
Thank you, Dr. Neeson.
Okay.
Come on up, Teresa.
Hi, Teresa.
We can share the microphone. I'm Teresa Magula, and yes, to answer the question, we have done one review of an officer-involved shooting in the city of Las Cruces. That was a shooting that involved a SWAT call-out and was associated with some different components. In that report, we discussed the need for the department to potentially review some of those crisis negotiation style responses, and so our report did include that type of analysis. The good news is that in order for us to review cases, they have to be administrative, internal affairs investigations of a certain threshold. And thanks to the changes that Chief Story has made since his tenure as chief, he is directing each of the officer-involved shootings to have an administrative investigation that is the type that we can review. So the good news is that it does not require a contract amendment at this point for us to take a look at those. The very unsatisfactory response is that we cannot look at these cases until they have been closed. And so a number of the cases that are providing more concern and challenge to community as well as to the department are currently pending litigation. Because of that, they have not entered into our scope as far as the timing of them, but they will be cases that we will review in the same holistic way that you have seen us review cases in other jurisdictions. What I can report to you is that in our next audit cycle, we will have 2 of these cases to present to your council. And so 2 cases will be coming in the next audit cycle, so stay tuned for a review of 2 of the more recent officer-involved shootings. And again, we will be continuing to review those as litigation, and all matters related to that case are closed.
Thank you, Teresa. Chief, did you want to speak on this?
Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Teresa already covered most of it, but just to make it clear, even before I was here, every officer-involved shooting generated an internal investigation, or what we call an II. There's two issues with that. One, there was a backlog in internal affairs, which now has been completely cleared out for all cases. So we're caught up, which is best case for everybody, including the officer. So it's assigned, it's investigated in a timely fashion. The second thing that delays it, though, is that if there is litigation, that doesn't go to OIR until it's completely resolved, which takes time. But the reality is, in the current scope of the contract, every officer-involved shooting eventually will go to OIR, and now we're starting to see it catch up, basically, from the time their contract started.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Neeson. And remember, if you want a little bit more back and forth, to go to the evening community meeting. Okay, any other folks would like to come up? Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem Bobby Green, City Council members, City Manager, thank you for providing this report for the community. I am grateful for the transparency. I do have a couple of questions. My first question is, with regard to the officer task force that investigates shootings, there seems to be a disconnect between what happened, the results of the officer task force investigation, and in a very high-profile case that just completed, the results of the outcome of the jury verdict. They were completely opposite. So my question is there something that can be done to make sure that the officer task force, which he mentioned the police are investigating themselves, can we bring in some external, basically maybe non-officers, somebody that might have a little less of a implicit bias towards the police, so that we can avoid some of this costly, long-term, protracted litigation? That's my first question. Second question is, it seems to me that there should be some, they're more than likely, I can't say positively, but more than likely there's some red flags. There are some warnings about some of these cases that end up in fatalities. And so are we looking at early warnings? Are we looking at red flags? And if not, could we start doing that? Because that could save somebody's life.
Thank you, Dr. Green.
Thank
Just
you.
in terms of the first question, I'll answer it by saying that the case you're referring to is not fully closed, so we will not be further discussing that. However, I think the answer that they both just gave was that once some of those cases are fully closed, that they will be going through the IRR process. I think that's what I just heard, and it is relevant to your first question. The second question, though, Teresa or Chief, would you like to answer that?
Mayor Pro Tem, as far as early intervention or warning signs, we have an early intervention system, which is just one of many systems to identify potential trends that could be cause for concern. And so that goes through a process. There's a policy for that that's on our transparency page and available through Muni Code as well, if you want to look at the whole early intervention system policy. That by itself will never catch everything. That's just one of the layers. So the reality is, police officers are human beings, and they're going to make mistakes. Sometimes those mistakes are small, sometimes they're more consequential, and there's consequences and accountability for those mistakes. I would argue that there's more accountability in police than any other profession. I know you can't see this, so I understand that you have to take my word for it, and that's hard to do when you're on the outside. But if you see the things that officers get disciplined for, and the amount of discipline and the amount of reprimands they receive for all kinds of stuff, it's at that point where if I discipline them anymore, I'm not sure I'm going to have any police officers, because we're constantly trying to address things, and we try to address them at the lowest level possible so they don't become bigger issues. But they can't write a report, write a subpar report without being disciplined. They can't, if they submit it late, they're going to be disciplined. If their recording wasn't all the way through the call the way it should be, they could be disciplined. If they didn't dock their camera the same day, they could be disciplined. And so there's hundreds of policies, and every one of those policies results in discipline for some people, if that makes sense. There's sustainments for all these policies. So it is a difficult balance between accountability and making sure that we don't discipline to the point we don't have anybody left. I would argue, and it's hard to really demonstrate this, but any way I can, I would, that there is a lot of discipline and accountability already occurring. No matter how much I do, bad things will still happen. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. We try to minimize and mitigate, and we should continue to look for ways to minimize and mitigate, because there's always more we can do. But it is, like I said, a difficult balance.
I appreciate your response, Chief, and I do understand that this is a difficult situation and we are dealing with human beings, but we're also dealing with human lives, and some of those lives have been lost, which I think could, if we make a few adjustments, maybe could be avoided. And that's what I'm looking to do, is see what we can do to work together so that we can avoid further incidents of loss of life, which could, eliminate a lot of excessive resources that we're spending, time that we're taking, resources that we have to deal with when something like this happens. So my other question is, I understand that it's an after-the-fact situation where you deal with the outcome, but the problem is that that's more reactive than proactive. So my question is, how can we be more proactive so we don't have to get to where we have to react because we've done it up front? That's my question. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Green, and thank you for always coming to these conversations. Come on up.
My name is Lucy Silva, and I'm a relatively new resident of Las Cruces, so this is new to me. And I'm wondering about the contract between the city and the OIR group. They said that this is their 7th audit, and I'm just kind of wondering how much longer it might include in the current contract, or if this is something that has to be renewed every so often.
Thank you. Ikani, do you want to talk about that?
Thanks, Mayor Pro Tem. I'll have Viola come up to answer that. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem, Councilors, Viola Perea, City Auditor. The OIR group was initially awarded a 1-year contract with 4 renewable 1-year contracts subsequent to that. They are currently starting their 5th year. We've already reached out to finance, and we will be renewing the contract for the police auditor. We will go out for an RFP and revisit the entire process again. But the OIR group is by contract required to report twice a year to council. They have 1 more year remaining, and then we'll again go through that process again, where they would be able to submit as well as anyone else interested in fulfilling that RFP for the city.
Thank you, Viola, and thank you for your question. Any other members of the public? Okay, that looks like it's it. Remember that there is a community meeting with our OIR group tonight at 6 p.m. at the Munson Center. And thanks again for coming today. If there's nothing else, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn. Second.
This is on the motion to adjourn the work session. Councillor McClure?
Yes.
Councillor Matisse is absent. Councillor Graham?
Yes.
Councillor Cran?
Yes.
Councillor Flores is absent. Mayor Pro Tem?
Yes.
And Mayor is absent.
preferences by department, district, or event type, so you get the updates most relevant to you. Step 4, select your notification frequency. Decide how often you want to be notified. Step 5, confirm your subscription. Check the box to confirm your preferences, then click subscribe. Visit lascruces.gov/subscribe today and take the first step toward building your relationship with the City of Las Cruces.